Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Tiesha Sinouthasy is the founder of Mind Nannies and a childcare specialist. Today we're talking about childcare for kids with special needs. Welcome, Tiesha. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Pandora, for this opportunity.
What are the challenges facing parents and caretakers of children with special needs?
Certainly, we know there's many. The Surgeon General's warning recently came out, which talked of his warning was about the mental health and well-being of parents, and as a result, also the children of those parents. So certainly we know that parents routinely report higher levels of stress, chronic stress particularly, and parental burnout. And so that's for parents, and certainly we know that this is even higher amongst parents that have neurodiverse children. Some statistics, even before the Surgeon General came out with this warning, there have been quite a few studies, particularly during the pandemic. And after that speak of this, there was just last year, Rethink First shared how 83% of parents of neurodiverse children take some time off of work to support their child academic performance, but also their mental health, compared to only 69% of parents of neurotypical children. And then there was also the study that came out that also spoke similarly about the chronic stress that parents are dealing with, how that's also a precursor to anxiety, depression. And so we know that this is a huge problem for parents that have neurodiverse kids.
Can you talk about the kinds of services that really accommodate neurodiverse children, those needs are, and what those interventions are, and what those practices are?
So we support some of those services. So Mind Nannies, we are the only childcare agency or nanny agency in Rhode Island, and surprisingly also in Massachusetts, that is providing childcare services for this population. That's our specialty. So certainly not exclusively, we do support neurotypical children as well. But particularly with our services, we provide nanny, babysitting, and then also event care services, which I think is so needed. Often I hear from parents that have a corporate event or function in the evening or fundraiser on the weekend, and they don't know what to do with their kids. There's no childcare. And so that is certainly near and dear to my heart, why I offer these services. And so we support those that will be doing this work and meeting the children where they are by certainly recruiting and vetting candidates that have that background already, working with those that have special needs. We support children and young adults. Young adults particularly is also a demographic that really is sorely overlooked when you're talking about neurodiverse children as well. And so many of our caregivers have worked through various services or programs that support this population through Medicaid programs. We have a lot of our caregivers have worked as respite workers. They've also worked in IHT or in-home therapy services as well. And they've worked in a lot of ABA therapy as well. And so they have that expertise doing this work. And so particularly how we help to vet and ensure that a caregiver will be a strong candidate to support this population is that during the interview process, so we do an application interviews, and during the interview process, we ask candidates, how do you go about building a relationship with a new child that you're caring for? And that question, in addition to several other questions we ask, is really so key because it's telling as to how that candidate does meet the child where they are. And so really what we're looking for and listening for are candidates that talk of taking time to get to know the child, that are, really observing, sitting back and seeing what toys the child plays with, what shows, they like to watch, and then engage in their world, right? Sit down beside them, maybe play alongside them if they're shy or, maybe not inviting you in. But then at some point, invite them to pick out their favorite book for you all to read together, or, that favorite toy or puzzle that you would like to do with me, to really get a sense of, what the child likes and supporting their needs that way.
How important is it that caretakers understand the style of a child, and like how important are conversations with parents really important to understand what a child's temperament and background is? And is there any kind of unpredictability too? Are there certain situations that are just really hard to predict?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So yes, so families come to us and they tell us what they're looking for, what their needs are. And so some of the initial questions at least that we ask are, tell us about your child, what are their current developmental needs, what do they enjoy, what are situations that are more challenging for them? And then maybe more importantly, how do you support them and de-escalating that behavior, and getting them to feel comfortable, relaxed, in a space where they can communicate, if that means verbally or through a PECS system, or some sort of device as well. And yeah, and so that's helpful. And then we also, we ask them several more open-ended questions, and then ultimately ask, okay, what are the skills that you feel and the temperament, personality of the caregiver that you think is going to be a good match for your child? Certainly, when you're talking about those on the autism spectrum and other disabilities, we try to do our best to find the right caregiver. And then, there are rare situations where the caregiver comes into the home and it's not a good fit for whatever reason. And sometimes I even hear from parents like, I can't I can't tell you why, he doesn't like her, but he does not, and it's not a good fit. And so we need to go back to the drawing board, right? And so I try to also ask them, have you had a child care provider before? Tell me about what that looked like, their relationship with the child, what worked well, what didn't, to try to get to that. But yes, sometimes it may not be a good fit, and that's okay too, right? And we can go back to the drawing board, hear some additional candidates, and see if it is a better fit. What I would also say too is that what we highly recommend and encourage parents to do, particularly if they're going through our agency, is to do a trial period. That is key, because to that point, you're not really sure if this is going to be a good match for your child or not. And so doing a trial period is an opportunity where you invite this candidate into your home for about a week, if not longer. And ideally the parent, guardian is home to supervise and see how that interaction goes, but really over the week to see, how is this caregiver at building a relationship with my child? And yes, fulfilling their responsibilities, but ultimately meeting their needs. And so doing that trial period is key to knowing, is this, the right match for my family or not?
I'm just thinking about how they must change in relation to, feeling more supported than they have before. And kids really benefit from having multiple role models. So
Yeah, most definitely. And I will say, particularly for parents that have neurodiverse kids, I often hear when they call the agency and they're exploring this, because certainly I think all parents are very cautious about, let me find out about Tiesha, about Piece of Mind Nannies. Can I trust them? Is this the right fit? But particularly also for parents that have neurodiverse kids, they are extra cautious and very unsure. And I will often hear particularly from them, if even if they're just utilizing us for a babysitter, they will often say, once I feel this out after a couple shifts or a couple months, I'm really looking forward to now having some time back for myself. Or I often hear from them too, like, I have not gone on a date with my spouse since our toddler, school age child was born because I'm so, nervous and unsure about I often hear I just did a visit with a parent on the Cape and she spoke of the same thing, just really being so uh, nervous, scared to leave their child with someone else. Like, will they really understand his needs or, his nuances and his quirks? And especially if their child's nonverbal, like, I really want to make sure that I bring someone into the home who will really get them.
Yeah, yeah. And what support is there from foundations, from organizations that are can help subsidize in cases where people can't afford childcare? Are
Mm.
are you in partnership with nonprofits that are able to do that?
Mm, I am not yet. It is a very strong goal of mine to be a vendor through Medicaid so that I know many parents are able to receive services like respite through Medicaid, and we are not yet a vendor of insurance companies. So that is certainly something I really want to be able to support families with. And also, similarly, DCYF or DHS. Also there's also subsidies that you can get through them as well. And that's something that I really do want to explore too, is to be able to offset that cost
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we know that childcare is so, so expensive. And particularly when you're talking about the childcare services that we offer, in-home childcare, where it's a very individualized one-on-one, one-on-two, those services are often the most expensive.
So, do you want to talk about the dearth in care? Give us an overview.
Dearth and options for childcare. There's why that exists. I mean, I started Piece of My Nannies in 2020. And so certainly, COVID and the pandemic have set us back in terms of childcare. Not, and that's not to say, don't get me wrong, childcare certainly has been an issue for parents for years on end. But particularly with COVID, that presented some additional challenges. For example, I think the biggest one that all parents can identify with is that daycares are struggling. They with staffing, with I've heard daycares have open classrooms that just aren't being used because they don't have the staff to be able to open up those classrooms. So staffing is a big one. And oftentimes, though, those daycares don't have the support, don't have the staff to support the specialized needs and supports that neurodiverse children need. And also, particularly with COVID, and it was timely, I started right in 2020, I saw that many daycare teachers left that profession due to pay rates, etc. And many have now become nannies as a result. Many left also because of certainly many that were older, maybe had their own health issues, left obviously because of wanting to work in a more smaller setting as opposed to a group classroom setting. So certainly I saw folks for that reason as well, but that has presented a huge challenge for daycares and for parents that really rely on that. What I will say too is just as we saw with pay rates increasing for daycare teachers, I mean, certainly we also saw that trend with the in-home childcare industry. Nannies' pay has increased as well as a result, and so that's become key too, because I think what the pandemic also illuminated is how necessary or the skills that are necessary to be doing this work. this is a demanding field, right? Working with children, any child, if it's groups of children, that is a very necessary and important skill set that these caregivers and daycare teachers have. And so as a result, pay has increased. Nannies aren't, I also think it's important to note that I think oftentimes I'll hear from phone calls too that nannies aren't, just playing with kids. I think sometimes some parents may think that, and as a result, maybe the pay rate they want to offer is in line with that sort of thinking. And I just think it's important to note that nannies, particularly, are childcare specialists. They are helping to foster, a child's growth and development. Similarly to a daycare, oftentimes they may, buy curriculums to support with their child, that child's learning and development, ensuring they're meeting their developmental milestones. So all of that is particularly key and just something I wanted to note as well. Often when they call an agency, usually it's like, one of the, their option C or D, maybe they tried this route, they tried the daycare route. And what I often hear from parents, particularly that go about the search on their own, is that they are finding many nannies that are unreliable, nannies that aren't showing up, parents that then struggle with work and calling out. And so that is why we have many steps in our process to ensure that we're getting those high quality nannies that will be reliable, that will show up on time, that will show up period, but that will also, yes, help to foster that growth and development.
Yeah. So how did you get into this work?
Yeah. So I got into this work because I was doing it. I was nannying and working through some Medicaid programs in Rhode Island. I was a respite worker in Rhode Island. We also have a program called a family support services program called PASS, or Personal Assistance Support Services. Essentially, I worked through many Medicaid programs, and I was working exclusively with kids with disabilities. And that is how I became acutely aware of the challenges that parents were having with finding childcare, finding folks that would stay long term when you're talking about neurodiverse kids as well. Unfortunately, many of those workers, the turnover is so high because it is such a demanding profession and field. And so when I heard of parents discussing these challenges, I loved doing this work, and I'm so passionate about it that I thought, well, if not me, then who? Right? There wasn't anything in Rhode Island, and I just thought, hey, I love this so much. I want I want to start an agency that will really be a reliable service and offer, like the name implies, offer that peace of mind to families. Was really so important to me.
And how did you get into nannying in the first place?
Going back, when I was studying college at Salve Regina University, that's when I began working professionally with kids. I worked through two babysitting agencies based out of Newport, Rhode Island at the time. And even upon graduating, I moved to Providence, and I still continued working through one of those agencies. So I was doing a lot of babysitting in hotels, at weddings, and occasionally some temp nannying. I also worked privately part-time with two families as a nanny. And so it was something that I was doing, on the side that was flexible. Flexible, I mean, in terms of hours. Obviously I was a full-time student, so needed something where I was maybe working more so in the evenings or weekends. And so that's how I got introduced to this industry. And then I moved to Providence, and I still work through one of those agencies very part-time. But that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to get my big girl job. And I started working through some nonprofit organizations at the time. And then I started working in higher ed. And I left that role in higher ed because I wasn't fulfilled in it, and I really wanted to work with kids again. I wasn't doing it as much. I wasn't working through that babysitting agency then. And so I was like, hey, let me find something working with kids again. And my thought process is, hey, I'll do this for a little bit. I'll figure out what's next. And then it became my what's next. And it, really led to the journey of becoming an entrepreneur and starting my own business.
Well, that's really nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Things are unexpected, and you're like, no, this is actually what I really love doing.
Yeah, yeah. I love it so much. And helping parents, and particularly, I know I mentioned, but, seeing that parent today and meeting her son on the Cape too was really just, she was singing praises about, oh my goodness, I can't believe I found your agency. There isn't anything like this. And my goodness, we need it. And so that's really, that's what fills me up, is hearing that and meeting parents' needs so they can get some time to themselves and not feel so stressed and caught up in the day to day.
Yeah, yeah. And right now are you hiring in Massachusetts?
Oh, yes, we are definitely hiring in Massachusetts. We're looking for more nannies and babysitters on the Cape, Martha's Vineyard as well, and all throughout southeastern Massachusetts. So please give us a call. You can look at our website, peaceofmynannies.com/nannies, or give me a call. I would love to connect with caregivers that would love to continue doing this work through an agency that has your back.
And how important is it to have an agency? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course, yeah. So, yeah, and all the times that I was doing the work, I was privately nannying. I was doing it on my own, and I never worked through an agency, particularly for that experience. And then, yes, I worked through babysitting agencies, and so I had that experience. And working through an agency, like I said, you have someone that has your back. So particularly one, I mean, you're going to get paid, competitive rates. You will also most likely get paid legally on the books. Oftentimes, particularly as a nanny, families will want to pay you under the table. And then, if you're a professional, then you don't have that unverifiable income when it comes to maybe buying a house or, buying a car. And so having that verifiable income is key. And in situations that aren't so great because, particularly domestic workers, nannies, you're so isolated. You're working in a family's home privately. So if something happens, a particularly challenging situation happens, it's not like you have an HR to call and talk through the situation that occurred. And so at least with having an agency, anything that may arise, any question that maybe a nanny has, if they don't feel comfortable, at least right away, discussing it with their employer, the parents, give me a call. And that's something that what I also really enjoy about having the agency, because working as a nanny, I maybe more so with one family, but I've had some really challenging situations, and I didn't have any support or anyone that I could lean on. So that is really the ethos that I bring to Peace of My Nannies, is really helping to grow our caregivers and nannies, but also to be a support system and a mentor for them too.
That's great. So can you talk about the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights?
Yes, yes. So I am so glad that Massachusetts has a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. Rhode Island doesn't yet, but Massachusetts does. And this is there's a national push There's an organization called the National Domestic Workers Alliance that really is advocating for more cities and states to adopt this. Currently, only 12 states and 2 major cities, as well as DC, have the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. And so what it is essentially it's a law, legislation that requires that nannies have, requires that domestic workers receive at least minimum wage. There's a number of key points of it, but they are receiving at least minimum wage. They're receiving key benefits like sick time, parental leave, overtime. You can think many nannies may work more than 40 hours and they're not getting overtime. And also requires that they have a written agreement or a contract that outlines all of these stipulations as well, what their work schedule will be, what their rate of pay will be, and then that rate of pay for overtime, benefits that they'll be offering. And so I love to see that Massachusetts has this because domestic workers, I think the key point here is that 95% of domestic workers in the United States are women, and more than half are women of color. So they are, they are certainly, they can be overlooked. They're working privately in homes. And that population, particularly women of color, really want to ensure that their rights are being honored by employers, by private families. And in having the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, it really ensures that, that the system as a whole, really values this work, care work, which is so critical. You're having someone take care of, yes, in my field, their child, but also, the elderly, those with disabilities as well. Really ensuring that their work is valued. And as a result, they're being compensated accordingly and they're treated as a professional employee.
Very, very important. Very cool. So my last question is about older children, teenagers. Do your services accommodate for those too?
Yes. Yeah. So we support up to age 21 for now. Perhaps a little differently than the nanny that is working with an infant or toddler, a specialized nanny that's supporting a young adult. Oftentimes those families are looking for support with bringing them out into the community, socialization, having them join community groups or community activities. The transportation, also teaching them life skills like going to the grocery store, picking out the items they'd like, now paying for that, those items, greeting the cashier at the register, all of those life skills, particularly I'll say is what's unique about nannies that will support that population. I often hear from parents like, I don't know why she'll do what the nanny asked or, the nanny is so patient and, and no fault to parents, a lot of times, yes, it can be very stressful. And then we can be, parents can be short with their kids or just, let me just do this for you so that it gets done quickly because we need to get out the door, right? And hiring a caretaker, they are there to completely devote all of their time to your child. So they can be patient in teaching them how to make a sandwich, how to pay for the items at the grocery store, whereas sometimes, parents are used to, yes, doing the things that need to get done so they can achieve the things they need to and get out the door.
You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mason. You can find her at masonmusic.com. That's MAESYN.